District Attorney Eric Gonzalez. And now, please welcome the 57th Governor of this great state of New York, Governor Kathy Hochul.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Please sit down. Our state is getting safer every single day. As I said in my State of the State address, and have said countless times since then, protecting New Yorkers is my top priority, and we're getting real results. I want to thank individuals who've been at the forefront of this change, leaders in my administration, but also our partners on the ground, our district attorneys, who really are seeing life sometimes at its worst and sometimes at its best. And I want to thank them for being strong allies and pushing through changes in our legislation over the last couple of years, but also ensuring that their voices are heard when it comes to funding that they require to do even more. So let me give a round of applause and gratitude to District Attorney from Queens, Melinda Katz, District Attorney from Westchester, Mimi Roca, District Attorney from Brooklyn, who is the one and only Eric Gonzalez. We've worked with him a long time. And Alvin Bragg, our District Attorney from Manhattan. Councilmember Farrell Lewis has joined us. Assemblymember Taylor Dowling has joined us here as well as our advocates who you'll be hearing from in a couple moments. Now, as I mentioned, statistics related to crime overall are trending in a very positive direction. Last month, the CDC released new data showing that New York State now has the third lowest firearm-related mortality rate of any state in the nation, improving going to 3 positions more improved since I became the governor. In 2023, the upstate murder rate is the lowest it's been since 1968, when reporting began. Data for the first half of 2024 shows we're down about 19% from last year. And meanwhile, New York City murders are down 13%. In August, we saw the fewest number of murders in 4 decades. Overall crime is falling. Upstate crime is down 28% from a decade ago, down 40%, and other crimes we've been tracking. So I want you to know my priorities. When we first came to office, the murder rate, the shooting rate was too high. We focused on this. We drove that down. And then we had challenges with larceny and retail theft and car thefts. They're down double digits. We know New Yorkers deserve to feel safe when they leave their homes, when they're on the subways, in our streets, and many more New Yorkers do now. But let's talk about what happens in that sacred place, the home. The place you should have, that foundation of security. And what is coming to our attention and why we're here today is not talk about our successes in other areas and say we're done, but say, where do we need to do more? And when you think about the ultimate betrayal, that someone that you trusted, that you perhaps loved, someone you thought loved you, violence perpetrated by someone you know is the ultimate betrayal. And we have to talk now about how we drive the incidence of domestic violence down the way we have other levels of crime. That is what I want you to hear today. We are going to be laser focused, as we have been, but even more so, with more intentionality, more resources, more effort, more media attention on what is happening to help in our fight against domestic violence, and standing up for those whose voices have been silenced for too long. Now, I have a mother, like many, who were inspired by their moms. She didn't just do good things to impress people. She did it because it was the right thing to do. And I will give you a brief idea of what her life was like. Growing up with her mother living above a garage, it was her uncle's car dealer or repair shop. And she had a father who was abusive to her mother. And she saw as a child that betrayal of love and trust that should have surrounded her as a little girl, and it was not there for her. because she saw what her own mother had to endure. Ultimately, the husband, the father left, basically abandoning them, leaving them on their own. My mother basically had to raise herself. And her mother had to work multiple jobs as a waitress. Life was hard. And in that respect, you could expect that she would also perhaps turn and find someone who had similar propensities to her father. That's all she had known, right? But in turn, she decided to help others. And even as a young girl, and her mother died when she was 16 and my mom had to raise 3 little stepchildren as well. She had to grow up so fast. All she wanted to do was help others, so they never had to endure what she saw her mother go through and what she had to endure as a child. My mom didn't have a chance to go to college. She was valedictorian. She was editor of the paper. She taught religion on weekends, and she was raising 3 little kids. Extraordinary. Extraordinary. She didn't have a chance to go to college, even though she was so smart, until I was in college. When I was in college, she decided to go back. She needed to be an inspiration for the younger children behind. What she studied was to become a social worker. She didn't quite make it there because of illness, but she was 1 credit closer, 1 credit short of becoming a social. And during that time, all of her work was to help women who are victims of domestic violence. And while I was an intern for the New York State Assembly, my mother was actually testifying before the Assembly, talking about what she had seen as a counselor, as a therapist, as someone who listened, and told the horrific stories of what she had heard and witnessed and who she was taking care of. And I remember her telling me that there was even a wife of a doctor. I mean, you think these beautiful big homes, they're very prominent in society, and you assume everything is perfect in the world. And there was a time, yes, before cell phones, there was telephone cords. And this man used to strangle his wife with the telephone cord and leave her unconscious on the floor and beat her after he came home from being a day as a doctor. You know, this friendly face to the rest of the world. Stories like that are still seared in my knowledge of what people have to endure. And my mother made sure that legislation was changed, that when a woman called the police, who used to come to the door responding to a cry for help, and so often the police would talk to the husband, and the husband would say, "No, everything's okay here. You can go away now." The law was changed. My mother was a champion for this, to say, no, you must create a record. You must interview the woman. You must find out what's happening in that house, because too many women are suffering in silence. So that, and also becoming a great champion to help women in so many other ways. And finally, for my mother's 70th birthday, she decided, I don't want a party. I want to open a home for victims of domestic violence, a transitional home, because she knew the needs were so great. It wasn't just getting them out of that environment that day. It was going to court with them, holding their hand. Who's taking care of the children when they're going to court? Who's making sure as they try to be retrained for jobs, because so many didn't have a career, they became mothers right away and always relied on the man for financial resources. They needed to learn skills. So my mom and dad bought a former funeral home. I mean, it was kind of creepy. We're all in there, especially the basement. But we turned the basement into a playroom for kids. We turned the attic into a computer lab. And there were 6 beautiful rooms that my mother and I decorated ourselves, painting them with soothing colors, bringing in flower, bringing in pictures, a little backyard with a swing set, trying to create an oasis for them to start the healing, and also grab those children, the ones who had only seen violence and pain. And they come there with hardness in their eyes. They don't seem carefree like children, but over time, they started to melt. You know, we'd take them out and play with them. I would babysit sometimes. My husband would take them to ball games. And even if we didn't change the lives of thousands of people, we changed the lives of a few. And some of them went on to be have homes of their own and became champions talking about this as well. I tell you that story because I want you to know what drives me. That story, that inspiration, to know that one person can make a difference, but in my position, I'm not one person, I'm one of many. And the people in this room are working shoulder to shoulder. The people behind me are working shoulder to shoulder with me and others to say no more. And that's what I want to make sure happens, that no other child is robbed of a normal childhood, that a woman is stripped of her confidence, and being betrayed and never able to love again. We have to change and break that cycle of violence that's happening, not on our streets, not in our subways, but in the security of that apartment or that home. And I want to make sure that those who feel they are trapped and are fearful of seeking help know that there's a place they can come to. And so we come down to what is needed. We did a roundtable. We spoke about the roundtable I did last year and listened to so many of your stories, and you're going to hear some. I was the first governor to secure funding for flexible financial assistance for victims of domestic violence. They know they have a media crisis. They have to get out of the circumstances. This helps them, thank you. This helps them find housing. They cannot stay in that house of abuse, that house of, they literally have to flee, sometimes with just the clothes on their backs, grabbing their children and taking them to safe when they finally say, this is enough, I can't do it anymore. They need housing, they need financial stability, they need a chance to rebuild their lives. And I've signed bills into law, and I think our legislators have been great champions and partners in Albany to help survivors better enforce the orders of protection. Think about that. If it's that dire and you go get a court order and it's not being enforced against the person who is now stalking you, and this happened at the house that we ran. We had to always worry about security. There are people who find out where the woman lived and would come after them and try to disrupt their lives and even harm them. So that was always something on our minds. We've also increased penalties. We've banned pornographic deepfakes from being shared. And we signed into law the Rape is Rape bill, and saying that victims of the most devastating form of sexual violence can also have protection under the law. So we can do a lot in legislation, yes, and you all fought for this. And guns are often the instrument of death. When you think about the high number of gun murders, gun deaths, it's with a past or present intimate partner. Women are losing their lives. I've worked overtime. We've done everything we can. We passed, the Supreme Court overturned our law that I had in place. 100 years, a governor could protect her people from people with concealed weapons. And the Supreme Court took that right away. Well, we didn't just sit there and say, well, that's how it is. We immediately convened as the legislature. We passed legislation. And we also bolstered our red flag laws. So many times the warning signs are right in front of you and you can't do anything about it. Now you can. And we've issued thousands and thousands more orders of protection. Before I issued the order, the change in our red flag laws, there were 1,400 extreme risk orders of protection that are put in place to protect women and children and others who are around someone who could do harm to themselves or others. 1,400 went to 22,000. There are lives saved in that number. I know it to my core, that the guns have been removed from people who could do harm, especially to intimate partners. More needs to be done. 1 in 3 New York women are impacted by domestic violence, and 1 in 4 New York men are as well. I want to make sure we put a spotlight on that fact. And members of the LGBTQIA community are at risk, as are trans New Yorkers, especially at risk. And the statistic that is so staggering is that 80,000 New Yorkers experience domestic violence every year. It doesn't discriminate, as I mentioned. It's not a socioeconomic issue. It's not race. It's not geography. It's an issue of control. It's an issue of someone taking control over your life, and it can reach anyone. So I'm going to continue bringing the power of the state to bear against abusers, and we're today announcing that there's $35 million being invested from the state, historic investment toward this fight. It's the largest investment to fight domestic violence in state history. And we're expanding support for our prosecutors. $5 million for each of the 5 district attorneys downstate and more for upstate as well, empowering them to pursue proactive solutions. And I've talked to many of them. I've talked to assistant district attorneys. They want to do more. They want to do the right thing. They want to help these victims just put the perpetrators in jail so they can have some peace of mind and get on with their lives. And giving them the support they need will allow for that. We heard that firsthand as we were doing our budget preparations last year. And we need to have them have the resources to build stronger cases so they are successful in court. That's what this is about. And again, outside New York City, we're taking on strategies that have lowered violent crime. The same strategies we used to lower violent crime, we're now deploying them to help victims of domestic violence. So I'm proud to announce a new statewide initiative, statewide targeted reductions in intimate violence. It's easier to say the STRIVE initiative. It actually works when you look at it that way. And so this initiative is going to be similar to our GIVE initiative, which is the Gun Violence Elimination Program, which has been wildly successful. So we're going to continue getting money to those partnerships as well and helping them develop strategies. So we're going to keep working on that collaborative approach and focusing on the top 20 counties outside the city that have the highest rates of domestic violence. This will bring together district attorneys, police agencies, probation departments, community-based organizations, and create plans specifically for each county's needs. Ultimately, the goal is to hold perpetrators accountable, ensure that there's support for services for our victims, especially trauma-informed and survivor-centered information and support, and there has to be continual training to understand that when an individual has to go to court over and over and over, it's reopening the wounds that might have just been starting to heal even a little bit. It's like ripping them open again. So we have to be aware that there's this repeat of the trauma that continues through the process, and that's why we have to minimize their exposure to this and figure out a way to do this that sees them as individuals who are still suffering in great ways, even though they mask it so well. We have to understand in their hearts they're still broken and they need to be helping. We need to help them heal. So my hope is that years down the road, we look back and say, this is when it all started to change. As I can proudly talk about these other statistics around the state, which are incredible given where we were just a short time ago, I want to be able to stand here in a very short time and say we also drove down one of the most insidious crimes, the betrayal of trust, the abuse of someone that believed in you and trusted you and shares a home with you perhaps. Those are the cases we're going to stop. And if you are in the category of someone who abuses an intimate partner, a former partner, or anybody, we're coming after you. We've had enough. These individuals who've been victimized by you are going to be the ones who stand victorious afterward. When you are locked up, you are stopped from forever, ever laying a hand on someone who deserves a better life and justice ultimately. So this is going to be a moment we're going to look back upon, and I want to thank everyone for your support here today, and to introduce right now a district attorney who I've worked so closely with. She has been a champion. We've talked about her efforts, and for so many women, we have daughters, we have sisters, we have our mothers. I don't know a single individual in the state of New York who is not familiar with the case of someone, seeing them go through this searing pain, and we're also committed to stop it. And one of those individuals is Melinda Katz, our district attorney from Queens. Melinda Katz.
I want to thank the governor. She's humble in the way she describes it, but she listens. And that's an important part of being a leader, listening. So when we needed to have better ghost gun legislation, she heard us and worked with the legislature to make sure that we got it. When we had to stop people from coming in from the south and bringing guns into our borough from the iron pipeline, she listened to that too. When we needed stricter laws and to change the laws that were in place for arrests and for bail and for all the different things that we do every single day, she listens. I was listening to her tell the story about her mom, and it's quite a moving story. I got here a little bit differently. It's interesting now that I'm the district attorney and now that it's my 30th anniversary in public service, which is amazing to me. I am prosecuting under laws that we wrote when I was in the legislature and laws that I co-sponsored, the Course of Sexual Conduct, the Domestic Violence and Intervention Act that I think the governor was referring to, and so many other laws that I co-sponsored, and now we're here. And so when I became the DA, it was so important to me to give voices to those individuals that didn't have voices. And together we do that in our own borough. Each of us has our own way, and each of us follows the law. But I do want to thank DA Bragg, DA Gonzalez, DA Roca, and all the DAs that are out there that have to deal with the individualities of our counties. And I think that's an important part of this law, of the money today that we are talking about, is that every county is different, and every county needs to figure out how best to combat domestic violence with the resources that the governor is giving us. $35 million. That's a lot of money put to one area that each district attorney's office can use. In Queens County, we help survivors every day. In fact, we just got a dog, a service dog for our survivors and for our children that have to go in and testify and work with the dog, Kimmy, in case you're wondering. That's the name. Beautiful dog. But in Queens, we have championed and worked with our bureau chief, Mary Kate Quinn, and Chief Assistant Jen Nyberg on a group, it's not called Strive in our thing, but I love that we gave it a statewide name. We call it PROACT, PROACT DV. And in order to truly combat domestic violence, we need to solve the isolation. We need to solve the fear. We need to solve the economic dependency of it all. We need to make sure under the discovery laws as they are written, and everyone can talk about what should be done, but these are the laws we have. And at the end of the day, we can work within them, and we can get the prosecutions, and we can get the convictions that we need, and we can get the discovery that we need. So in Queens County, we developed what we call PROACT DV and now Strive statewide at the governor's encouragement. And there's 3 steps to it. First, we initiate evidence collection immediately after domestic violence, immediately after the crime is committed, and we can improve our compliance laws with discovery in that way. And second, we collaborate and are prompted, and that's the key. We are prompted by the police response to be able to confer with the police at the earliest possible instance in every domestic violence case. And by the way, when you're prompted when a domestic violence occurrence happens, we start the investigation and we get the evidence and collect the evidence and take pictures and everything we need to do before we even have a defendant. We don't have to wait till there is a defendant. And third, we connect domestic violence survivors with culturally, in Queens County, we are the most culturally diverse area in the world, with appropriate services to make sure that it's safety planning and counseling, and we do that before we get the defendant in custody to make sure that our witnesses and our claimants and our survivors feel comfortable because those services are being given to them. Time, Governor, you're so right, time is of the essence, and we have to do it 24/7. The first 24 to 72 hours after a domestic violence incident, when the perpetrator especially has fled the scene, that is when the greatest risk of harm to the survivor and to the family members can happen. And this protocol allows us to build strong cases and further protect the survivors. And to do this statewide and in the city, there needs to be prompts from law enforcement that something has happened. We can't do that without technology. We can't do that without coordination. We can't do that without partnership. The technology and the resources that the governor has given for us to do this and to accomplish all of this is so important because when we're prompted, we can work with the different agencies that are involved with the evidence collection, with the protection of our survivors, with the counseling services that are needed, with the new homes that need to be found so that their abusers can't find them. And it takes partnership with all of the agencies. So it's proactive. It is early response communication, it is early communication, it is early collaboration, and it is early partnership with our law enforcement. And I will give you an example of this. You know, the Queens District Attorney's Office is housed in the Queens Family Justice Center, where numerous service providers can help survivors in the immediate aftermath of a crime and for long-term planning. So we coordinate every single day. Our advocates work with their advocates, our ADAs work with their folks. And when an arrest is made, the evidence is in place. It's been collected. The pictures are taken. Hospital records are already being worked with. Different agencies that are dealing with this are already giving us discovery material. And how important is that? So it's communication, being prompted by law enforcement, It is counseling, and it is the district attorneys in the different counties, because here in New York City, we're a little different. Other counties have different police departments. If you're on Long Island or upstate New York, there are different police departments, and at least in the way we do it, the district attorney ends up being the coordinator and the holder of the information from the different law enforcement agencies. But there is no doubt that every county is different. And Governor, with today's money and with the leadership and the guidance from your office, every county will be able to make sure that survivors know that they are safe, survivors know that there is coordination and that law enforcement is doing exactly what they need to do to make people accountable for those crimes, and that survivors can move on and lead a great life, knowing that we are supportive of them, and that never ends. Thank you very much.
Call up Westchester District Attorney Mimi Rocha.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you for your leadership in general on all of the things that affect prosecutors and law enforcement. Gun safety in particular, you've been a role model for the country in how to lead in gun safety, red flag laws, and dealing with the consequences of the Supreme Court decision. Overall, I know from working with your office how important it is to you to balance public safety and also fairness. And it's not an easy balance to strike, but you do it, and we appreciate that greatly. And it is so important that we're having this moment now and your leadership on combating domestic violence here at the beginning of Domestic Violence Awareness and Prevention Month. It's incredibly appropriate, obviously, and important. I am the district attorney in Westchester County, so I represent the outside the 5 boroughs. And if we're going to brag about our therapy dogs, I need to say that Westchester County had one first. Lewis, he's an amazing dog who has truly provided comfort to so many victims in our office, and sometimes the attorneys when we need it. We are one of 20 jurisdictions outside the 5 boroughs and who have been tapped to receive this record funding through Strive, which is such an appropriate name because it is about what we are striving to do. We have made so many inroads in combating so many areas of crime, but domestic violence does remain one of the most persistent, used to be silent, but we're trying not to make it silent, killers and enemies of women and people from all backgrounds, all races, all classes, and all geography. My Special Prosecutions Division in my office handled over 2,100 domestic violence cases last year. That's a lot for our county. And the Victim Justice Center, which we work closely with served nearly 1,000 victims. That is almost a 30% increase from the previous year. So I'm proud that the governor is acknowledging that we can't run away from this. It's not something that we can say, well, this doesn't happen in our community. It happens in Westchester County, and we have to acknowledge that in order to fight it. The funding for Westchester, which I believe is $1.4 million, and we'll get the details on that as we go, really is a remarkable investment towards supporting the important work that the prosecutors in my office and our partners in law enforcement do. We have to remember that for law enforcement, responding to domestic violence is actually one of the most dangerous calls they can get. And we know that in 2022, in fact, there were 2 officers in Connecticut, you may recall, who tragically were killed on a domestic violence call. And it's such an important reminder that dealing with domestic violence is important to the victims for sure, and that is most important for the survivors, but also for law enforcement. It is part of their job, and they do it selflessly, but it is an incredibly dangerous part of their job. Westchester County is home to Yonkers, which is the 3rd largest city in New York State. You may not know that. And this historic funding will support both our work and the Yonkers Police Department and with the service providers and nonprofits that we work with on domestic violence cases, day in and day out, advocating for victims and their survivors and their families. Through Strive, we will expand our existing work as a leader in the county, training police departments on the use of high-risk and lethal assessments in domestic violence cases, which is a very important tool. We have now trained all 42 police departments in Westchester County, which we just finished this year. And that is an incredible feat and something that this money will help us continue that training in an ongoing way. And it has served as a model for other departments and other offices in the state. The partnerships are really what is key to fighting any kind of crime, frankly, and particularly in domestic violence. It isn't just the prosecutors, it isn't just law enforcement, it is as much the advocates and service providers who provide support. And I really am so proud to be standing here and be part of this and to particularly to help center the victims. My own mother was not a victim of domestic violence, but she was the victim of very violent crime. And I have always centered that approach to supporting victims very much as part of my work. And I think that is what this funding will help us do. So we've made great progress, but we still have a lot to strive for. And this funding will help. And so thank you very much, Governor.
Please welcome Vanessa Petrosian.
I also want to acknowledge that we've been joined by former borough president, but council member Gail Brewer, who's been a great advocate to help victims of domestic violence as well. So, Vanessa.
Thank you, Governor Hochul, and your incredible staff for welcoming me so warmly today. On September 16th, 2016, my husband and I awoke to the sound of our 5:30 a.m. alarm, as we did every Sunday to work a farmer's market for his parents. Barfield, our beautiful lab mix, was sprawled out by John's side of the bed. It was an ordinary Sunday morning, until John tripped over Barfield and began punching him. When I implored him to stop, he then turned his vicious assault on me. It ended after about 10 minutes. I then asked him what he was going to do when our then 11-month-old son, who was a mere 10 feet away, turned 2 and came into our room bright and early, jumping on the bed asking for breakfast. He paused, then replied, "Jack would never do such a thing." That moment was my aha moment. After 5 years of being brutalized, dehumanized, and almost killed, I was able to leave. That afternoon, I fled with my son and a diaper bag. And it's a good thing I ran, because when Jack was 2, he'd climb on my bed and body slam me, then open my eyes and say good morning. An uncomfortable way to wake up, but a memory that always makes me smile. I know had I remained with John, Jack would have been subjected to torture at his father's hands. Many have remarked how difficult it must have been to leave, but in retrospect, for me, leaving was the easy part. It's what came after that was hard. A month after leaving John, I filed a police report, which resulted in his subsequent arrest. No sooner than he was arrested did I have CPS calling to advise me that a formal complaint had been lodged against me for child neglect. Luckily, she was a seasoned professional and instantly recognized that this was a case of domestic violence. She suggested I immediately get an order of protection and include Jack in on it. The next day, I walked into the Center for Safety and Change in Rockland County, looking as disheveled as my mind felt. An advocate brought me to her office to explain the process of filing for an order of protection. She explained a lot that afternoon, much of which I couldn't absorb. When it was time to recount the years of abuse, I could barely string together 2 cohesive sentences. I was a shell of the woman I once was. Never did I think I'd be a statistic. Never did I think that I would become entrenched in the complex and so grossly misunderstood cycle of domestic violence, that I would be beaten unconscious, left with permanent physical injuries, and a single mother fighting to protect her son. Never could I have guessed that my strong-willed, independent nature would fall prey to a master manipulator, charismatic narcissist, a local college professor who would stop at nothing to destroy me. No one would have ever imagined that my life would forever be changed by domestic violence. Yet here I stand 8 years later, a survivor. Organizations like the Center for Safety and Change give survivors the tools, resources, the support they need to pull themselves up to fight for their freedom and safety. They believe survivors at a time when we feel so embattled that we question what we went through. Steadily, I began to find my footing. The all-encompassing reinforcement I received is what gave me the sustenance I needed to regain my sense of self and have the strength to define the norms of this process and persevere. Seeing over the past 8 years how many survivors need help daily has been as heartbreaking as it is shocking. It puts into perspective the dire need for more aid for victims. As an advisor for the Survivor-Led Resource Council at my sister's place in Westchester, in 2022, the committee and I participated in a listening session with OPDV to discuss the immediate needs of victims when they flee abuse. Temporary financial support was at the top of that list. Governor Hochul has continued to show that she hears us and has supported this need through the initiative Safe Funding. To date, it has provided financial support to 3,000 New Yorkers who are able to safely escape their abuser, often with their children. We just heard the governor announce several victim-centric initiatives. She is committed to investing over $35 million into giving victims the opportunity to start a new life free from violence. Often missing from these initiatives is the voice of survivors. Governor Hochul has changed that by directing the development of victim and survivor-led committees to participate actively with OPDV in listening sessions. She continues to make good on her promises to support victims and survivors of New York State. Providing education and training law enforcement is as critical to ensuring a positive outcome for victims as it is arduous and a complicated undertaking. Today's commitment of this $35 million to accomplish this, I can promise you, will make a difference. I've been publicly sharing my story in hopes it would raise awareness, educate, and offer support to victims and survivors. And because I made 2 promises to myself in 2016. If I could get through the court process and keep my son and I safe, I would never let anyone disrupt our peace. And I would never stop advocating for the many victims still living in the shadows of abuse. The governor's invitation asking me to speak today is just another example of the power the voice of a survivor has and how much good can be done when our government is one that acts on the public's needs. Domestic violence tears at the very fabric of our communities by dismantling family units and causing a ripple effect of repercussions that are felt for many years. The effects of domestic violence don't stop at the front door. Too often it spills into places that are supposed to be safe havens of their own. Perpetrators often show up and harass the children and their teachers of the victim and their colleagues. This puts people who have no direct link to the family's private issues in a potentially harmful situation. It results in injuries and fatalities to first responders, as the governor noted, and perpetuates generations aging into domestic partnerships contending with this ever-present epidemic. Domestic violence can happen to anyone, regardless of who they are, what they do for a living, and where they live. From the bottom of my heart, thank you, Governor, for your unwavering support. You are quite literally saving lives.
Please welcome Jessica Munoz.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Munoz. I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I'm also a survivor leader, and I want to explain what that is. That means I reinvest lived experience expertise to change re-traumatizing systems that are designed to help. That's one of the reasons I'm so excited about the money that the governor is putting behind this issue today. Unfortunately, with my story and many others who are survivors, when we get response, we go through a second phase of traumatization, unfortunately. And, I'm so grateful for the assistance of the Manhattan DA. I'm grateful for the outcome that in family court. But sadly, to get to that final result and to be safe with my children, I had to go through some things that I didn't deserve, and that comes down to a misunderstanding. And this money, this $35 million, I believe is going to tackle that issue of re-traumatization. It's going to give money not only to the DAs, but also to advocates who serve the communities like Sanctuary for Families, who I represent, and who treat us, the survivors, like the experts that we are. Before, when I was going through my abuse, I was working at New York Presbyterian as a tech. I couldn't finish nursing school. I got all of my higher education after I left my abuser and after I got assistance. So I'm really here to kind of flex today and say how strong we are as survivors. And when we're out of that crisis phase, we're really here and we can really lead this response. And please, I'm excited that the governor is supporting money behind organizations who buy into this survivor leadership culture. Cultural expertise is also essential, that greatly affects the response. And if we're all going to understand each other, then we need to spend time around each other face to face and really get to know each other. So I'm beyond grateful for this support, and I really do feel centered as a survivor when I'm treated as the expert in the field that I am. And again, just to extend my gratitude to Sanctuary for Families, the DA, and even Family Court also. So thank you, everybody.
That concludes our program. Thank you for attending.
Before I take your questions today, I'd like to address an urgent public safety concern. As we all know, the Iranian regime launched a missile attack on Israeli civilians just yesterday evening. At the same time, a mass shooting occurred on the streets of Tel Aviv. The Israeli authorities classified this as a terror attack. And while I know those events are happening on the other side of the globe, here in New York, we are the largest Jewish population outside of Israel and one of the largest Muslim and Arab populations in America. And so these global events have a unique resonance here with us. And as governor, my number one priority is public safety. And we have spent months preparing for this time of the year. We knew tensions would be high, particularly as we deal with the high holy holidays, as well as the advent of the one-year anniversary of October 7th. So earlier this year, knowing these dates were coming, I directed my administration to start preparing for enhancing our security, heightening our surveillance, making sure we have a visible presence. And yesterday afternoon, I asked for and received a confidential intelligence briefing with the mayor of New York City, with his head of counterintelligence as well, making sure that our teams are closely aligned and working together. We heard from representatives from NYPD and our State Division of Homeland Security and other law enforcement leaders. The most important takeaway from yesterday's conversation and further briefings today is that there are no known threats to New Yorkers at this time. Again, there's no known threats. I also conveyed this at a gathering of Jewish leaders to let them know that there are no known threats, but to make sure that the relationships are strong so they know we are there to be of assistance preemptively and be there if anything should occur. We have to be prepared for every single scenario. And for that reason, I have directed our state police superintendent, James, to increase state police patrols at at-risk areas, synagogues, yeshivas, community centers, mosques. You'll also see increased law enforcement presence at all critical infrastructure hubs, including major transit centers. And while we're working closely to make sure that all populations are protected, we're protecting not just working with NYPD in New York City, but also we have to be aware of threats that could occur in Westchester, Long Island, and other populations outside of New York City. Also protecting the Muslim communities as well as the Jewish communities against hate crimes that could ensue. Just as we've seen a major spike in anti-Semitism this year, we've seen increased attacks on our Muslim neighbors as well. So this includes enhanced monitoring of our social media and online sites, and recognizing that individuals can be radicalized by the toxic stew that is a slew of hate online, and we've seen the ill effects of that as well. Certainly the individual that was radicalized online, a white supremacist, an 18-year-old white supremacist who slaughtered 10 of my neighbors in Buffalo, would fit that category. And he was radicalized by the same online hate that led to the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. So with all this as a backdrop, we have increased our monitoring tools for social media, increased our state presence on the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, and right now we're ensuring that we have all hands on deck to fight the rising crime, the rise in these crimes. Now, the other aspect is parents worried about their students on college campuses, especially throughout the year, in light of last spring, but also during the high holy holidays. I want to be clear. Every student in New York should be able to worship safely on their college campus. And before the semester even began, my teams have worked closely with campus leadership to ensure that they have safety and security plans that we have reviewed and signed off on. Yes, students have a First Amendment right to protest, but they also have a right to gather and celebrate the holidays without fear of harassment. So as we also approach not just the holidays and the holy days, as we approach October 7th, I want to continue reminding New Yorkers we're going to be vigilant, monitoring the situation. There'll be many vigils, likely counter-protests, and nothing is more important to me than keeping everyone safe. So we're taking major steps at this time, again, coordinating with other law enforcement individuals and community organizations to ensure their safety during this difficult time. Any questions?
We're going to start with on-topic questions on public safety and domestic violence. Rebecca?
Governor, on the issue of public safety, I do not believe that you've commented yet about the police shooting at Sutter Avenue, which is a big public safety concern for subway riders and just generally police response to potential crimes. Have you viewed the body cam footage, and how do you believe the best way to proceed with those officers is?
Right now, the Attorney General is investigating this, and that is the course when there is a officer-involved shooting, and I look forward to hearing the results of her investigation. But it is deeply troubling what unfolded on that day, and no doubt about that.
Governor, on this announcement, former Governor Andrew Cuomo, his legal bills tied to sexual harassment and other misconduct alleged cost nearly this amount, of over $25 million. Why is the state continuing to pay his legal bills?
As we explained at the time, there was a 3-year statute of limitations that told when he departed, August 24th, I believe, of 2021. That time period just expired in August this year. So during that time, any other victims, alleged victims of harassment, had the window to come forward. So it'd be premature to talk about any kind of settlement, if there is to be any, during that window until we know there'll be no more people coming forward. And now is a chance for our legal teams to assess the conversations going forward. That's the difference.
Outside that window, in a perfect world, do you think it's right that taxpayers should continue to pay those legal bills? Is that a good use of public money?
You're asking me to question the wisdom of the law that's in place that I must follow. I also question the wisdom of the requirement that taxpayers have to pay for this, but that is the law that I must follow.
Great. Any off topics? Back.
Governor, prosecutors said in court this morning that Mayor Adams could face an expanded indictment accusing him of taking bribes and illegal campaign contributions. How is it possible for the mayor to right the ship and restore confidence of New Yorkers if we know there's more to come?
I was in communication with the mayor yesterday around our joint efforts to ensure the safety of all New Yorkers during the time that I just described, the holy days, the threats between Iran and Israel at this time, as well as October 7th. So I want to reassure New Yorkers that my priority is to ensure the continuity of services, and people expect us to work together on law enforcement, and we are doing that. And I'm also going to work to make sure that we see no evidence that there's been a degradation or decline in services to New Yorkers. Now, we also know there is an enormous there are legions of public servants who do their jobs every single day. And I want to thank the public servants in New York City who are still getting up, putting on uniforms, making sure that trash is picked up, making sure that our streets are clean, making sure that we're fighting illegal cannabis shops, making sure that our streets are safe, our subways are safe. So those are all the aspects that I'm working to make sure that they continue. And I'm just monitoring the situation to see if there's any disruption in those. Otherwise, the process must play out.
Jason?
Governor, you've made it clear that in your phone calls with the mayor right after the indictment came out that you pressed him that you wanted to see some changes, that you wanted to see him righting the ship. We've seen Tim Pearson leave the administration. Do you think now that Phil Banks belongs in a public job?
I will tell you, I am watching the situation closely, that this departure is a good first step, and we're watching to see what else unfolds over the next few days.
Could you put like a number on it? Is this half, is like Tim Pearson leaving, is that half of what you want to see, or are there like 8 more steps that you want to see be taken?
You asked if I could, but I won't.
Why not?
Because it's inappropriate for me to have a litmus test to say, okay, everything's fine now with this number, and we're not fine without that number. That is an irrational approach that I'm not willing to take. I'm working to make sure that the key positions, working with the mayor, are filled with people that are going to be responsible, but it is ultimately his decision to make those. And I'm just letting him know that we're monitoring the situation. We expect changes. That's not a secret. And changes are beginning.
Governor, how come you didn't decide to have a public meeting? I know you guys met in private yesterday, but about the security briefings, the mayor just had his at 1 pp. Did you not want to appear together with him in public, especially during this time, the challenges he's facing?
No, because I wanted to be able to ask highly classified, sensitive questions to an individual who is monitoring possible threats.
Are you
And I
worried?
reserve the right to continue to have private conversations when it's in my quest to make sure that we are ensuring that all New Yorkers are safe.
Are you worried that either you or other Democrats could be damaged by association with the mayor? I mean, the New York Post just wrote about Tom Suozzi possibly wanting a job with City Hall, and the Republican opponent out there says, hey, look at this guy, he has association with the mayor, don't vote for him. Are you worried about those key congressional districts?
Every single race runs on its own merits. We have strong candidates. That's how you win. Number one, you have strong candidates. You also have the backing of a very strong, now robust Democratic Party. And I'm working hard to make sure that we deliver the House of Representatives to the Democratic hands to make sure Hakeem Jeffries is the next speaker, because then we'll have assets and resources and opportunities flowing to the state of New York like we've never seen before, and that is why I'm focused on this. If we're going to be beneficiaries of more money for infrastructure, more money to deal with homelessness, more money for education, and more money for our transit. So that's why I'm focused on that, and each race will be determined on individual local races, so I'm not anticipating this to bleed over in any significant way, but I'm not going to be speculating on individual races.
Okay, last one, Rebecca.
The mayor has been compared to Donald Trump in some of his comments, as particularly about being targeted by the DOJ for political reasons. And when asked whether he accepts the former president's support, because the former president did offer some words of support, he did not explicitly say he condemns it. He said he will accept anyone's support, which has gotten him criticism. Do you think that the mayor is sounding like President Trump right now, and what is your response to that?
I'm not going to speculate on what was the thought process behind it, but I will say this. People say all kinds of things. I believe that Mayor Adams is a strong Democrat. All right, thank you. Thank you.
Tim Walz while he was in New York.
I didn't have a chance to talk to him this time, but we're in regular communications, and all the Democratic governors were really rooting for him, and we're proud to see him, and especially the way he was able to, in a very significant way, capture on video J.D. Vance's inability to say that Donald Trump accepted the legitimacy of the past election. I thought that was very telling and something that all voters need to know about. Thank you, everyone.